This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios Podcast Network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on the Apple Podcast Store, rate the podcast on Spotify, and subscribe wherever you are listening. We have a merchandise store on TeePublic. You can get all of your Graceful Atheist and Secular Grace themed items there. The link will be in the show notes. If you're in the middle of doubt, deconstruction, the dark night of the soul, you do not have to do it alone. Join our private Facebook group, Deconversion Anonymous, and become a part of the community. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. Arlene interviews our guest this week, Natalie. Natalie is from New Zealand. Natalie's family was Catholic, but converted to a evangelical Pentecostalism at her birth in a harrowing story that she will tell. Natalie grew up then in the Pentecostal environment, and Natalie was always fascinated with various other religions, and she eventually converted to Mormonism. She is now an atheist after deconstructing her faith. Here is Arlene to interview Natalie.
Natalie, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you and I have just recently connected through email, and this works out perfectly. I'm excited to hear your story. We usually begin, just tell us about your religious upbringing.
So I grew up in a home where my dad wasn't really religious. He grew up Catholic. My mum did as well, but she became a born-again Christian when a couple of years before I was born. But she was really, really devout. My younger years were spent in Baptist churches, and then my teenage years were in Pentecostal churches, evangelical, those happy clappy type of churches. And then as an adult, my husband and I were Mormons for a short little bit, and now I'm an atheist.
Fun journey. Okay, so
yeah,
you grew up, you said Baptist and Pentecostal, those were your formative years. Good experiences, bad, yes, a little bit of everything?
A little bit of it all. So a little bit of backstory is I was born quite premature. So my mum loves to tell the story of how I medically died when I was a few days old, and they'd rushed a Catholic priest in to come and baptize me. But at the time, the Pope at the time was in town, and the priest wanted to go and see the Pope more than he wanted to baptize a little baby. So he only did like a little blessing sprinkle type thing and went on his way. So my mum always used to talk a lot about how I was her only child that was born once she was a Christian, and I was lucky because I wasn't baptized properly into the Catholic Church like my siblings were. So that kind of set the tone for my childhood a lot. Like, my mum took me to a lot of healing meetings. Because I was born so early, I have chronic lung disease. Like, my lungs never developed as they should have. So I was in hospital really regularly as a kid. And I don't know, mum would just take me to these healing meetings and claim that God had healed me. And I was the little kid that would go to show and tell at school, and everyone else would bring a book or a toy or something they'd gotten on holiday, and I would bring nothing except, I went to a healing meeting last night. You need to believe in God so that he can save you and you can be healed if you need it. And that was at a really young age, like 8, I want to say. Yeah. So,
wow.
Yeah, very, I'm not sure how to word it. Like, my mum was very, very devout. Like, everything was about God. Everything at home when mum was around, it was very, we had to be careful what music we listened to, what movies we watched. Like, my kids now think it's funny because I wasn't allowed to watch Mary Poppins because it had magic in it.
Wow.
But yet mum would go out and I'd just be at home with dad and we'd watch Die Hard. And that was okay, but Mary Poppins wasn't. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah, but I knew Christian family. I did not grow up Christian, so I missed a lot of that.
Lucky.
I know, right? But as an adult, we knew Christian families in the church who could watch like gory horror movies at Halloween, because like Halloween wasn't weird for us.
Yeah.
But then they wouldn't watch anything with sexual stuff. And we
Yeah.
were like, I mean, like,
Yeah.
is any of it super helpful? But yeah, that's wow, that's fascinating. So Die Hard at Christmas or just whenever? Because, you know, that's a big thing.
Whenever.
Die Hard's Christmas. Whenever. Okay,
Yeah,
just
whenever
curious.
dad wanted to watch it, it was all good.
I love it. So then high school, you said as an adult, you guys were Mormon? Because we were taught, you know, Mormons are like a cult. So how did you guys jump to that?
So as a teenager, grew up in Baptist churches, like as a child. My dad left my mum and we moved to city, and that's when we got heavily involved in Pentecostal churches. So I was a youth group leader. I was a Sunday school, like a children's church leader at, I think I was 11. Like, really, I was just a child myself. I'm not sure why they made me a leader, but that's all right. So I was super, like, 5-6 days a week at church doing stuff. At 16, I felt like God was telling me to go on a missions trip, except I had left school because I wanted to devote more of my time to the church. So I left school at 16, was voluntarily, not being paid at all.
Never. Yeah.
No, I mean, why would they, right? And yeah, my mum had gone to this conference and I went along, but purely because the conference was at the beach and I wanted to go to the beach. Thought that was more fun than going home at 16. But there were these women there who had come from Namibia, it's just up from South Africa a little bit. And they ran a couple of homes, there was a woman's home and a children's home. And I loved working with kids. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll come and work in the children's home. And then reality set in of, I don't have the money to fly from New Zealand to Namibia. But then these women that ran these homes, they went and spoke to my mum and they were like, I think God is leading you to go as well. You should sell your home and you should pay for you and Natalie to come over. And so my mum did, which horrifies me as an adult now. But at 16, I was like, oh, cool, I don't have to pay for it.
Are there siblings? You said your dad had left, so like what are the dynamics of just you and your mom dipping out and heading to a different continent?
Yeah, so I have an older sister. She's 5 years older than me. So at that point, she had a family of her own. My brother is 3 years older than me. He was still living at home, but my mum was like, you can go find somewhere else to live. Gave him a little bit of the money from selling her house to like set himself up. And we just went. Oh. Literally within about 3 months, Mum had sold her house. We'd gotten all the vaccinations we needed to get and off we went. And I need to preface that with my mum had undiagnosed bipolar. So I really, truly, looking back now, think she was in us kids, we call it like a bipolar high. And as soon as we got to Namibia, she went into a low and I didn't see her for a couple of weeks, really. So we did that and that was interesting, to say the least. It was a very traumatic religious experience. Like within 24 hours of us being there, these women were telling the people in the homes that we were prophets and that everything we said was directly from God. And like I just said, like my mum went into a bipolar low. So she was literally in her room. It must have been for about the first 3 weeks we were there. And I was 16 sitting there going, I don't know what to do. Like these people are making me feel special. They're treating me really well. All of that type of stuff. Like it was really, really messed up and probably meets all the criteria for a cult. But I didn't have that knowledge at the time. So yeah, there was that experience, and mum actually left the home because the people who ran it were trying to get me to stay in Namibia by myself. Like they'd even taken me into the immigration office, and thankfully the immigration officer was like, you're only 16, where are your parents? So that didn't go ahead, thankfully. And that was a bit of a wake-up call for me of like, because at that point mum had left the home and was living with some friends that she'd made over there. So I was by myself in this situation trying to navigate it. And they used, like they would always tell me that God was telling them things that I should be doing. And I'd been taught a lot, you don't question. If people say that God's telling them something, who are you to question it? That's between them and God. And maybe that's God giving you a bit of a nudge, a bit of direction, that type of stuff. So it was really, really messy. And I ended up literally escaping, like secretly packing my bag, and the friends that mum had made came and picked me up, and I'd chucked my massive backpack into the back of this tiny car. And there was a guy there, his name was Seth. He was the son of the woman who ran the homes, and I think he thought he was like Jesus. Like he grew his hair out so it was really long, grew the beard, wore a white robe all the time and sandals, and he was a really strange man. I laugh now. At the time it wasn't funny, but I remember him literally chasing the car, yelling that we were going to hell for leaving. And we ended up back in New Zealand after that, but I didn't have anyone I could talk to about it, because I'd gone on this missions trip and felt so special, and like I was doing this amazing thing for God, and then it all went to, I don't know if I can curse on this.
You can cuss. Yep, it went to shit, girl. Go ahead.
It went to shit. And I was still involved in church and stuff when we came back to New Zealand, but it just never felt the same. Like there was a lot of questions on my end of what the heck is going on. I came back and we moved to city at that point, both mum and I got involved in another Pentecostal church. Like within weeks, I was a youth leader. I was preaching. Like there was no pause to deal with what had happened. And I still didn't go back to school. I still wanted to just devote my time to the church, because I think that's where I found, because my home life was quite unsettled. Church was where I found validation. It was where I found family, community, all of that. So I never wanted to say no to anything. I wanted to, I just wanted to be there all the time. I wanted them to see, hey, I'm doing this, and maybe eventually they can pay me to do, gosh, I'm sure it would have been about 60 hours a week worth of work. Like,
wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And keeping in mind, I was only 17 at that point. Still a baby. Like I have teenagers myself who are close to that age, and I'm just like, I'm horrified at the thought of them being in that position. But yeah, I met my husband at 17. So we were both youth leaders, and he was on the worship team. He was the drummer. So that was cool.
Heck yeah.
Well, yeah. We got married 10 months later. It was very, very quick because we were in the thick of purity culture, and it was, you get married because God forbid you live together or have sex or anything like that before marriage. And then we made the decision to take a year off leadership, and we spoke to our pastor about it, and we were like, look, we need to do this for our relationship. I mean, we'd only been together for 10 months. We needed to get to know each other, but I was told that I was leading my husband astray because I was the one who had suggested it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, so to backtrack a little bit as well, at the time I had a full-time job because my mum had kicked me out of home. That's a whole other story. But I had a full-time job, but I was working 60 hours a week. And I'd gone to our senior pastor and to our youth pastor because I was a youth leader. I was on the welcome team. I was on cleanup, set up, all of this stuff. Like, it was really intense. And I said, I can't work my 50-hour job that I'm being paid for and do the amount of stuff that I'm doing at church. Like, I'm not stepping back entirely, but I need to just dial it down a little bit. And that just resulted in people not talking to me. And, they would talk to he was my fiance at the time, but they would talk to Steve, and they would happily welcome him to gatherings and stuff. Like, I lost friends. And that really started, like, I didn't have the language for it at the time, but I'd have really bad panic attacks at church, where I'd have to go sit in my car just to try and breathe through it. And I would try getting prayer for it, because mental health wasn't a real thing. It was just, you pray and God will make it better, and read your Bible a bit more and you'll be all good. And that just wasn't the case. So we got married and we ended up leaving that church, and we tried to do it in as healthy a way as we could. We tried to meet with the senior pastor and just say, look, we're going to find another space for us. Thank you for X, Y, and Z. And then they started rumors that we were going and starting our own church, and it was a shit show. And we tried other churches, but I would have panic attacks, even just hearing the worship music, because I'm not sure what Pentecostal or evangelical churches listen to in America, but here it was heavily Hillsong based at the time.
Oh,
and
yeah, same. That's what
same.
we have. Yeah.
Okay. I would hear it because you know how at church, right? Like, it's, you go in and straight away it's a worship service and you all sing songs.
Yes.
And then you have the preaching.
They have to prime you. Yeah, they have to prime you to be able to hear the foolishness they're about to spit out. Yeah.
But straight away, like within 5 minutes of being there, I would have a panic attack. And I'm so thankful that my husband was understanding and that we communicated as much as we could at the time, given I think I was maybe 19 by that point. So he was like 21. Like, we were babies trying to navigate all of this. And then we had children young. Like, I was 21 when I had my eldest, and then 22. And we tried going to church with them. But honestly, trying to go to church with two babies is just... I spent my whole time in the creche part, and I was like, this is doing nothing for me. I could just be doing this at home. So there were a couple of years where we would try, but then I'd have a panic attack and then be dealing with the kids, and I'd be like, I just want to go home. But once our kids went to kindergarten, they started making friends, and their friends' parents were mostly Mormons. So that's how we got into that. So that was a very long explanation to get to that point.
No, thank you, because that's a lot to happen. Like, being young parents, being just married when you're still a teenager, trying to navigate that, realizing that the church environment you're in, when you say, hey, this is overwhelming and too much, they're like, oh, well, like just, so those are big parts of your story. So Mormonism. So how does this go? I'm fast. Like it's funny even now, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of this stuff, but Mormonism is like this far-fetched, crazy thing way over there that I don't know anything about, even though the more I do learn about these more, I guess, on the fringes versions of Christianity, they all sound very similar and have lots of the same things. So anyway, tell me about Mormonism. How'd that go?
Yeah. So because my friends were Mormons, I would occasionally take the kids to events that they would have, and I missed that feeling of community. I missed that feeling of belonging, and I can look back now and go, it was love bombing, really. And that's what they're taught to do. You're taught to bring people into the church. It's not, I thought they just liked our company and wanted us to join in. Yeah. And I'm sure it was a mixture of both, but I definitely do think there was very much wanting to get brownie points for getting us into the church, essentially. But my friend gave me a Book of Mormon, and I started reading it, and I'm an avid reader. Like, I love books, and I only got maybe 10 pages in because I was like, this is so poorly written. I don't know if you've ever tried reading any of it.
I have not. We've had a copy because we've been gifted one before, but I never tried it.
If you want to, you can try, but it's not an easy read because for many reasons. But I met with some missionaries, which felt really weird because at the time I think I was 25, and these missionaries were 18-year-old boys, and I was like, you're making me really uncomfortable. I didn't understand then that a big part of the Mormon church is modesty, and I didn't feel like I was immodest, right? I had been taught to cover my body, you shouldn't be tempting anyone, that type of stuff. But I was like, we're in my own home, it's summertime, I was wearing a singlet, I didn't think anything of it, and they would just be staring inappropriately, where we had to get some of the bishop involved, where I was like, I don't want to meet with these ones, can you send some other ones over? Which is tricky because it's all very it's not like Pentecostal churches where anyone can go to that physical church. In Mormonism, you have wards. So if you live in a geographical area, that's the building you have to go to. And it's the same with the missionaries. They're set to a building. Okay. So it was a little bit tricky. And I feel kind of bad because they were kids themselves, but anyway, it was just awkward. But my husband is very much a free thinker and likes to question people. Like, he, not in a rude way, but like he likes to push people as, well, why do you believe that? Even though we were Christians, he would still do that. Like, I think he found it kind of funny. But we met with the bishop because, so the bishop is like the pastor of the church. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure. Yeah. And he was like, Natalie, I don't think you should get baptized because Steve's not on board. And I was like, I can do what I want. Like, we're not like, we don't have to do this together. And he's like, no, that's not okay. And now I understand the church is so patriarchal, and it's, you're a woman, you do what your husband says. And that really threw me. So, and I try not to live with regrets, but I do regret the fact that I spent weeks hounding Steve. I was like, just read it. Just watch this documentary. Read this book. And he was amazing, and he read it, and he was like, look, this is obviously something you want to do. I don't want you going to church without me, so I'll just join too. And he did it, and he was honest with the missionaries. He was honest with the bishop, and he was like, look, what did he say? He said, if I grew up believing that Jonah could be swallowed by a whale and survive, and that, if I can believe that, then I can believe this. And I really think for him, that was the start of him going, this is a load of shit. I don't believe any of it. He even got up they asked him to speak at they call it a stake meeting. So it's a bunch of, not like STAKE, not the meat.
Oh, okay.
A stake meeting. So it's a bunch of the wards get together, and it's like a big deal to be asked to speak at one of those. And they asked Steve, and he got up and said this. He was like, well, if I can believe this, why wouldn't I believe this? There was no, God has told me this is true. But they loved it. They were like, yeah, that's okay. And I was like, what? Like, they were talking about him being on track to be a bishop one day. And we'd only been members for like 6 months. We went through the temple. We went through the endowment ceremony. We got sealed as a family. So my kids were at the time, I think, 5 and 6. So they still talk about our sealing ceremony. Do you know what that is?
Is it like what happens if you didn't get married in that church? So you have to, it like now makes you whatever thing? Okay.
Yeah. So if we had actually gotten married in that church, we would have been sealed then.
Yes.
And then our children would just be automatically sealed. But because we were converts, we had to get sealed, and then our children had to come in and get sealed to us, and that meant that we could be together forever in the celestial kingdom. Because you know how there's like 3 degrees of heaven? No,
go for it. Tell us all the things.
It's complicated. I feel like I'm not going to get it completely right, because a lot of it I just tuned out, and I was like, yeah, whatever. But it's, so you've got the celestial, and I get these two mixed up. It goes celestial, telestial, terrestrial. So the celestial kingdom is the one where you're closest to God. As a Mormon man, you have your own planet, and that's where you and your family are. Yeah. So actually, a lot of it, funnily, even when I was a Mormon, I learnt by watching the Book of Mormon musical.
The musical, yes.
Which is, it's funny, but
for people who don't know, it's created by the guys who did South Park. So just think of like how wonderful. And I have not seen it. We've listened to the soundtrack 1,000 times, but we have not seen it yet. But anyway, continue on.
Yeah. So, we were sealed together in the celestial kingdom. So the next kingdom down is for people who believe in God but aren't Mormons or aren't sealed or haven't gone through the temple. So there's that realm. And then the third one is for people who are good people but don't believe in God. They're kind of at the bottom. And then hell is for apostates, so for people who leave the church, so who had that understanding. So hell isn't really a place for, like we would, like I was taught in Christianity, where if you don't accept God, then you're going to hell. You can not believe in God and you'll still go to some form of heaven, but you won't be as close to God. But hell is reserved for apostates and
people who were Mormon and then left. Yes. Wow, that's so specific.
I know. It's very detailed. And I love having information. I love the intricacies of religion. But it was a lot. Like I remember we had some lessons before we'd gone through the temple, and I asked our friend, I was like, because a big thing in the temple is you do baptisms for the dead. So
yes, I did know about this.
Heard of that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he was talking about how you can have a loved one who isn't a member of the church, but when they die, you could do a baptism for the dead for them, and then in the afterlife they can make that choice whether or not to believe, and then they can go to the celestial kingdom. But I had some family that had died that I thought were complete assholes. And I was like, I don't want them having that opportunity. I don't want to spend eternity with them. They are bad people. And he was like, oh, well, and he actually said, if you're a dick in this life, you're probably going to be a dick in the next life. So don't worry about it. But I was always like, but there's always that possibility. Like, it just didn't make a lot of sense, but they had an answer for most things.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, we went through the temple. That was a whole experience in itself. It was very, very
elaborate.
weird. Yeah. Like being told I had a name that was given to me that I would have to give my husband so that he could pull me into heaven. And I remember saying, I can get myself into heaven. What are you talking about? Like, that was a very foreign concept to me. And it was quite amusing because after our endowment and after giving my husband my secret temple name, we got home because he's not supposed to tell me his. I'm not supposed to know his, but that's just not how we operate. So I asked him when we got home, I was like, so what's your temple name? And he was like, I actually forgot. And he was like, I was too embarrassed to stick my hand up and ask for it again. And I was like, so you don't know your name that's supposed to get you into heaven?
Oh gosh. Yes, like, well, now we understand why he is where he is, because he forgot that name that they told him at his magical ceremony. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this how long did this last, and how did you guys get out of it?
So we were only in the church for 18 months. So
oh wow,
you have to be a member, like a baptized member, for 12 months before you can go through the temple. So we had done it very bang on that 12 months. Partly because, it's like this secret club that I wanted to see what happens. I wanted to be a part of it. And then I was a part of it and I was like, what the hell is this? But for us, it came down to we were having to unteach at home what our kids were learning at church, specifically around gender, around being queer, because that's there are very, very defined lines for that in the church. And I'm so glad that we left and that we taught our kids love who you want, be who you are, because our eldest is non-binary and our youngest is gender fluid, and they're both queer, and the damage that could have been done if we had stayed. Like, I'm so relieved that we got out when we did, because for them there wasn't a lasting. I mean, they walk around telling us proudly that they're little heathens. Like, our kids have a good sense of humor, but the religious stuff that they were exposed to hasn't affected them, which I'm so grateful for. We then whittled our beliefs down to, so we left that church and then we said, right, examining a lot of the Bible, I don't agree with it anymore, but I still believe in God. I still felt it was important to believe in a higher being. So we whittled our beliefs down to love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, and soul, and love others as you love yourself. And that's how we tried to operate for a few years. And then we were out for a drive one evening, and my husband said to me, he was like, I don't believe in God. And I panicked and expected there to be like lightning hitting our car going, you're going to make God angry. Like, let's not do this. And I mean, come on. Believing in a being that's going to be angry at you for having free will and saying, look, I don't believe this, is probably not a being I want to believe in. So for me, it definitely made me think, and it made me go, well, I don't believe 99.9% of what's in the Bible anymore. I definitely disagree with organized religion, or just religion in general. It's not my cup of tea. It's done nothing but damage to me, personally. And yeah, there was about a year of conversations back and forth. So, Steve listening to your podcast, listening to the Thinking Atheist, and him sending me episodes going, hey, I think you might want to listen to this. And I was like, no, I really don't want to. that's pushing it. But I did start to, and I was like, oh, this actually makes sense. This, it's not just me that has these doubts and these concerns. And I was able to start verbalizing what I had been thinking internally for quite a long time. Like probably since I was about 16 in Africa when all of that happened. I was able to talk about it and talk about the harm that religion had caused for me. And I understand it's not that way for everybody, but yeah. And then I think I can't even remember when it was, but just one day I was like, look. So it started off, I think I'm agnostic. I think there could be a possibility that God exists, and if someone could really prove to me, then sure. But now I'm just like, that's not a being I want to believe in, or would ever. Even if someone could come to me and say, hey, this does exist, I'd still be like, yeah, no, I'm good, thank you. So yeah, now very proudly an atheist, and yeah.
Ooh, you rebel, yeah.
Yeah.
So how long ago was that?
Oh, about 4 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, just before the pandemic. Yeah. So around 4 years ago. Yeah.
So what does life look like now?
So it's complicated. It's I mean, we lost friends when we left Pentecostal churches. We lost friends when we became Mormons. We lost friends when we left the Mormon church, and we've lost friends since being atheist.
Yep.
It's quite a lonely journey. There's not many people that get it. So that's been hard. I mean, for me, one of the biggest things was in 2020 in New Zealand, we'd gone into lockdown for, I think it was about 3 months. And at the end of it, my father-in-law passed away. And it was the first time I had to deal with death while being an atheist. And hearing people say, well, we'll see him again. He's in a better place. Like, I've really had to sit with that uncomfortable feeling and go, well, I don't believe I'm going to see him again. I don't believe there is anything after this life, personally. And that was really hard to work through and to help my husband through and to help our kids through, because for me growing up, I had people that died, but it was, well, they had a relationship with God, so we'll see them again. They're in a better place. They're with God. I didn't have that reassurance for my kids. So we did things like, I was just joking one night because my kids called their grandfather Grandpa. But their cousins call him Pop Pop. And he had originally wanted to be called that with our kids. This is an important part of the story. Yeah. But I had told him, I was like, if you use that name, I'm going to make fun of you because it sounds like you're passing wind. But so when he died, their cousins were talking about Pop Pop and stuff. And I just joked, well, you know, you can look up the stars. And if there's one that's kind of shooting by, it's Pop Pop being powered by his gas. So our kids then developed, and it was a joke, but it was almost like a comfort to them that we can look up the stars and we can just imagine that that's Grandpa, you know, and but not in a sense that we actually think he's up there. I mean, one night we had something shot through the sky, and it wasn't a plane. Turned out it was like a satellite thing, which we don't get in New Zealand. So everybody was like, what the heck is that? And my first thought was, because I'd been outside putting the rubbish out, and my 14-year-old was with me, and they were like, Grandpa? Is that Grandpa? And I was like, no. We were joking when we told you that. But that was a way for us to deal with that uncertainty and to provide a little bit of comfort for them. And I mean, yeah, it's that really cemented for me, though, I don't believe in God, and I'm okay with that. So now I've even had conversations with my mum, who is still very much a Christian, where I've told her, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in prayer. And she's been horrified and been like, well, how can you live your life without that? And I'm like, I can live my life quite happily. I feel more peace now without that constant thinking of, if I swear, I'm going to go to hell, or God's going to be angry with me and I'm going to have to repent, or never mind the bigger things that they tell you about that, are going to affect your life. Like I can be myself. I can think for myself. Like I've really had to, because my husband and I got married so young, and because we were in such a patriarchal religion, there were things even like I was taught to vote for who my husband was voting for.
Oh, yeah.
So at the moment in New Zealand, it's election time. And having discussions with my kids about the fact that Dad and I might not be voting for the same people, and that's okay. But for me, that's still a bit of a novelty. And that wasn't anything that my husband enforced. That was just what I was taught through different mediums, whether from the pulpit or from books or that type of stuff. I've really had to develop an opinion, and which I find really hard because I'm a people pleaser and I don't want to upset anyone, but my opinions don't have to align with my husband's. I mean, obviously to be in a healthy relationship for us, there are just foundational things that we need to agree on. But there are other things where I'm like, even like picking bedding 15 years ago, I would have just been like, oh, well, you choose because you need to be comfortable because this is your space as well, which I somewhat understand. But it meant I ended up hating all the furniture we had, all the bedding, all that type of stuff. And now I'm like, give me all the stuff that I like. And I've found a joy in decorating how I like. And obviously there are compromises because there's more than just me living in our home, but my opinion matters too.
Yes, absolutely.
And I really don't mean that in like that was never anything my husband said to me. Like he actually didn't grow up knowing that. And I think that is the differences between being an assigned female at birth in this particular religion and being an assigned male at birth. It's just very different yes. experiences, and we've had to work through that a lot. I definitely feel a lot more peace now, a lot more. I'm comfortable within myself, and obviously that's still a work in progress. But like I find a lot of comfort and peace in being out in nature. We go hiking a lot, and like we're really lucky here in New Zealand. We have bush tracks like 5 minutes away from our house, type of thing.
Wow.
But for all of us, I don't know if you've heard of like forest bathing, and I don't mean that in the sense that we go into the forest and have a bath.
No. Like just being in it, like full immersion into the forest.
Yeah, just being able to, I guess, disconnect from the busyness of life and just breathe and just be. And maybe it's because we're focusing so much on just trying to breathe, climbing up a mountain or whatever it might be. But it's really good for us. We all notice as soon as we get into the forest, we're all much calmer. We're much happier. And so that's been really good and a good coping strategy for us to replace things like prayer or popping on worship music or whatever it would have been at that time.
So how do you find meaning? Like, what are the things that make your life meaningful now that you don't have religion?
That's a tricky question. How do I find meaning?
Or do you? Like for me, the things that I used to struggle thinking they were idols, like my family, my personal time, novels, like the things I love, those things don't necessarily give me meaning, but those are the things now that I can just love without
Yeah.
feeling like they're vying for my worship. Because I used to get all worried that I was worshiping my family, worshiping my kids, worshiping myself, instead of like just letting those things be what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. So probably much the same, I guess. I've had to learn how to relax and rest because that was not okay. That was, I mean, when you're doing stuff 5 or 6 days a week for church and being made to feel bad if you're not there, that's been a really hard thing for both my husband and I to learn, to just sit our butts down and just enjoy relaxing. I'm still not very good at it, but I want to set that example for my kids of that's important for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being to sometimes just relax. You don't have to actively be doing stuff all the time. I find a lot of meaning in I probably annoy our family and friends by I talk a lot about social issues.
Ooh.
So because our kids are queer and we've had to have a lot of difficult conversations with family and with friends, and it's weeded a lot of them out because I have no time or patience for people that don't accept my kids for who they are. But also being like, this isn't just our kids. It's,
yes.
you know, you need to be loving and accepting of everyone. Things like talking about race, because we are a mixed race family. Obviously, I'm a Pakeha, so I'm New Zealand European, but my husband is Malaysian, and our kids are Malaysian. And sorry, I keep forgetting that not everyone knows Te Reo words, so I go to use them, and I'm like, hold on, that needs an explanation. So just talking about, hey, that matters, and
yes.
we are a family where we talk a lot about politics. We talk a lot about different religions. I love reading about different religions and cults, and sometimes I think that must be really weird to other people that I know. So I haven't been diagnosed yet, but I'm 99% certain I'm autistic. So I get hyper focused on things, and I'm partly saying that because our youngest has been diagnosed with autism, and a lot of those traits that they had, I just thought were things that I learned from me, and now I'm going, oh, that makes sense. Where I had like a year or two where I'd devoured every book I could about Scientology, which I understand to some people would be really, really weird. But I loved learning about it. I learned a ton about the Amish community, about, like, when I was a Christian, it was learning about Mormonism, which is weird considering I became a Mormon, but I wanted to know all about it. It fascinated me. I find a lot of enjoyment in learning, and I think part of that is because I left school to devote all my time to the church. I didn't leave because of a lack of intelligence. I left because of that, what's the word? Fervent devotion to the church.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'm currently in the process of applying to go to university, which feels really scary.
Yay.
But I want to do that because I've been a stay-at-home mum for 15 years, and that's what our family has needed, given there are some higher needs there. But I love learning. Like, the amount of books we've got are just, it's a bit ridiculous, and we live in a tiny house. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably the place where I've found a lot of meaning for me outside of religion is educating myself about social justice issues and learning about the world outside of Christianity. Because I wasn't allowed to for a long time. That wasn't okay. It wasn't, you should be of the world, but not in the world, that type of stuff. Yeah.
I am self-diagnosed inattentive ADHD.
Ah.
And so I'm like, ooh, rambling and hyperfixations. Yes, I am here for it. That's fantastic.
You get it.
Yes.
That's good.
And for me, I'm not formally diagnosed, but it was watching my older son struggle with things I struggled with as a kid that I thought were just like, oh, this is just like a thing. And it was like, actually, this looks like inattentive ADHD. And then a friend of mine, she said, she leaned over my shoulder one day, and she's ADHD. So she knows, she was paying attention. And she said, neurotypical people don't have 36 reminders on their phone for stuff they do every day. And I was like, they don't? And that was that was like a year or so ago. And I was like, oh. So.
Wow. Yeah.
So speaking of recommendations, books, podcasts, anything, and I'm sure you have plenty. So yeah, do you have any recommendations? Things that were helpful on your journey out, or something you're just loving right now, or something, whatever you want to recommend.
So I did read, it's a Dan Barker book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction.
Ooh, I have not read that.
Quite interesting. It's very, I actually read it, my husband and I read it out loud to each other, and our kids were coming in and out of the room while we were reading it. And they were like, does the Bible actually say that type of stuff? And I was like, yeah. But I found that quite validating too, as not just me that just thinks these things about the Bible. There's actually a book written about it. Like, that was quite eye-opening. I was going to say Richard Dawkins, but I feel a little conflicted about recommending. Just given what he has said about trans people recently, I'm just in a.
It's like when you're a Christian and you realize a lot of the dead guys that you thought were super fantastic, like enslaved people and like harmed entire groups of people, and it was perfectly okay. And then here's this living guy who's like, here's some great information, and here's some other things that and it's like, it gets real complex real quick.
Yeah, it's a little murky. Like, I found the content of some of his books helpful, but I don't know, it hits something in me, I think, because my children identify as trans. I just just like with J.K. Rowling, right?
Yeah,
my kids loved Harry Potter. Like, we were obsessed with it, and now there's nothing Harry Potter in our house.
Yeah, we ran into the same thing.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Well, with Harry Potter, and then that's a whole other episode discussing like whiteness in the atheist world and misogyny in the atheist world, and like all these things that like they don't magically disappear when you leave religion. They're just tweaked, and the wording might be a little bit different, but it's the homophobia, like all the things. So go ahead.
Yeah. It surprised me and shocked me, and his books were ones that even our kids had started to read. So yeah, but a couple of his books have been good. But probably for me more podcasts, because I can put it on and do other stuff at the same time. Like, I'm good at reading fiction and just getting immersed and lost in those books.
Yes.
But often with nonfiction, I have to do it in little bits. So I find podcasts for me are just better for me to get that information in, because I can do it while I work out or do the dishes or whatever it might be. So your podcast has been really good to hear other people's stories. Like, for me, having lost a lot of that community, it feels really lonely, but then thank God for technology that we have this, and I can feel somewhat connected to other people, because I don't know if it's different being in, like, living somewhere like America where it's just a bigger country, there's more people, if it's easier to connect with people who have been through similar things or have similar beliefs, because it's not easy here in New Zealand at all. It's yeah. So your podcast, Mormon Stories, I haven't listened to it in a little while, but there was a period of time where I avidly listened to that, because he doesn't just interview ex-Mormons, he interviews people from all religions, and I found it really educational and really helpful, and especially being in a little bit of a unique position of having grown up Pentecostal evangelical to being a Mormon for a little bit. There's not many people that have done that, which is good. I'm glad they haven't, but yeah, it's just a unique experience. So being able to learn about both on the same platform has been really helpful. The Thinking Atheist, really like that podcast. The Deconversion Therapy podcast with Bonnie and I want to say Karen, but I don't think that's her name. My memory's not good, but I find them really funny. It's a little bit more of a light-hearted take. So sometimes I'll listen to quite a serious one where I have to think quite hard, and then I'll listen to that one and I can just laugh. And that one's also been quite good for my kids. Like if they're around, I can put that one on and they can see some of the humor in what their dad and I grew up with, because sometimes we have to explain why we're reacting in a certain way to something because it's because of our religious upbringing, and our kids are going, what? Like they don't understand it, which is great.
Yes.
But there sometimes is that disconnect of we're not, like we sometimes have to pause a little bit to think about something and work through, well, hold on, why am I reacting to this way?
Yeah.
And then we can move through it. But we've tried our best to communicate that with our kids. But sometimes just having these podcasts on when they're around helps them to know, as not just their dad and I, that have these things that we have to work through, or because to them it's they don't get why people are transphobic and homophobic and racist. And I have to go, well, when you're indoctrinated your whole life
that it's only one way.
Yeah. I've also found just different accounts, like on Instagram especially, just getting those little snippets of, they'll share a post and I can just quickly read it and then sit with it for a little bit and think about it and go, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I didn't say before as well though, I've actually been diagnosed with complex PTSD and PTSD, in large part because of religious trauma. So that's been a whole other thing to navigate as well.
Yes, yeah.
I can't remember if I answered that properly. Sorry.
You did. You gave me books and podcasts, yes, and Instagram accounts. Well, Natalie, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you telling your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it.
My final thoughts on the episode. Y'all, the church will just not pay people. Volunteer work is wonderful. It's great to be involved in things, but it seems like I keep hearing on episodes like churches will just exploit their people. They will just keep using their congregation members and just completely burn them out and fill them with Bible verses about how God will renew them and then keep burning them out. And it breaks my heart. Like Natalie was 11 and 12 and 16 and 17, like in leadership. and would have stayed in leadership as a young married mom if they hadn't changed to a different church. Young parents need like a whole 2 or 3 years off of having to do anything more than take care of their kids, maybe go to work, depends on that situation, but like just trying to exist with little tiny people in your home and sleep. It breaks my heart and it makes me angry thinking of how often this happens to people. Another thing that stood out to me is Natalie's willingness to see the things in the church that she knows is not going to work for how they're going to parent their kids. So they have little tiny kids, they're in the Mormon church, and there's these strict rules and roles and genders, and it's a binary, and there's no nuance. And she's like, I can't do this. I can't do this to my children. I'm not going to put them in boxes. And the freedom that her kids as teenagers now and as they grow into adults have to just be themselves, like that is a beautiful, good, wonderful gift for her kids. Even though, we want our kids to understand other people's perspectives, her kids not like having a hard time understanding why her parents are having a hard time with certain things from religion. It's probably good for them because they haven't had to endure the trauma and the suffering. They can grow in empathy and figure that kind of stuff out, but they didn't have to have personal experiential knowledge of some of those beliefs and practices, and that's a good thing. That's a next generation of kids growing up without religious trauma. So, Natalie, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed this conversation.
The secular grace thought of the week is embrace your irreverence. I was listening to a comedy podcast recently, and they were talking about how successive generations have become more irreverent. But what came out of that was the ability to have a sense of humor about the religious context in which they grew up. Now that you have deconstructed, maybe deconverted, you have more space from the religious context you grew up in, and you can see the comedy of it all. Irreverence no longer has eternal consequences, so embrace your irreverence. Until next time, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network.